welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really exciting area, how our understanding of the brain can help us build smarter artificial intelligence. We're using Michael Azoff's book, Toward Human-Level Artificial Intelligence, as our main source. It digs into how neuroscience can inform, the chase for AGI.
Yeah, and this is perfect for anyone who wants to, get a solid handle on these big ideas without drowning in jargon. Azoff really tries to bridge that gap between neuroscience and AI.
Exactly, connecting the dots.
That's what we'll try to do, too. Pull out the key concepts, the stuff you really need to know about where AI might be heading, especially AI inspired by the brain.
Right. So we've got excerpts covering, pretty much the whole journey from the earliest ideas about artificial neurons
Hurry back.
all the way to biologically plausible models and this big goal of human-level AI, or HLAI.
And our mission, really, is to sift through it all and pull out the most important nuggets. We want to give you those surprising facts and deep insights, but keep it digestible.
Okay, sounds good. So let's jump right in. Maybe start with the early days, AI then and now. Azoff mentions McCulloch and Pitts, 1943.
Yeah, that's often seen as a starting point. Their big idea was trying to model brain cells as simple logical units, like little calculators almost.
Right, performing logical calculus.
Exactly. It was super simplified, of course, compared to real neurons, but it was foundational. It got people thinking computationally about the brain.
Then came Rosenblatt's perceptron in 62. That was a step forward, wasn't it?
Definitely. It was an early feed-forward. Network information flows one way, input to output, but Rosenblatt hit a snag.
The hidden layers.
Yeah. He knew adding layers between input and output would make it smarter, let it learn more complex things. But the question was, how do you train those middle layers? He apparently had the idea of feeding the error back, but the method wasn't quite worked out. You couldn't easily figure out how much each connection in those hidden layers contributed to the final mistake.
Okay, so that leads to the big question. Training these multi-layer networks.
And the huge breakthrough, which Azoff covers, came in 1986. Rumelhart, Hinton, and Williams. Their paper on backpropagation.
That was the key, wasn't it? Error backpropagation.
It really unlocked the potential. Think of it like, okay, the network guesses, gets it wrong. Backpropagation is the math that lets you send that error signal backwards through all the layers, tweaking each connection just the right amount to improve the guess next time. Azoff actually notes Rumelhart did a lot of the core development.
And wasn't there some context around Minsky and Papert around that time? Their critique of perceptrons.
Yeah, that's a fascinating bit. Minsky and Papert were critical of the single-layer perceptrons. Their critique highlighted limitations, but one related issue was the type of activation function used then basically an abrupt on-off switch.
Like a step function?
Exactly. And mathematically, that's a problem for learning because the slope is either 0 or infinite. You can't make those small, gradual adjustments needed for learning complex patterns. There's no useful gradient signal.
So what was the fix? This seems important.
It was deceptively simple, but brilliant. Replace that sharp on-off switch with a smooth S-shaped curve, a sigmoid function, or something similar.
Making it differentiable.
Precisely. That little change meant you could use calculus, specifically the chain rule, to calculate how much each connection contributed to the error, even layers deep inside the network. It allowed the error signal to propagate back smoothly.
Wow. A small math tweak unlocks deep learning, essentially.
Pretty much. And Azoff adds some nuance here, pointing out that the core ideas of backpropagation had popped up earlier.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he mentions folks like Ivaknenko and Lapa in 65, Amari in 67, Paul Werbos in his 74 PhD thesis.
Werbos, right. I've heard his name.
And Jan LeCun in 85. So it was kind of brewing in different places.
The case of multiple independent discoveries, almost.
Seems like it. Azoff even tells this story about Werbos trying to get Minsky interested in his thesis on differentiable neurons back in the early 70s.
And Minsky wasn't.
Apparently not. But eventually, this connectionist approach, powered by backpropagation, gained traction. Even DARPA started funding it again.
It's interesting how these things cycle. So did it take off immediately then?
Well, yes and no. By the mid-90s, Azoff says the initial excitement cooled a bit. Progress wasn't as dramatic as some hoped in many areas. And AI winter is sometimes mentioned.
But it didn't completely die out.
No, not at all. There were important, maybe less flashy successes. Azoff mentions Jim Simon's Renaissance technologies using neural nets in finance, and things like optical character recognition becoming practical.
Right, OCR. That makes sense.
But the funding environment got tougher. And this is where Azoff highlights a key move. A group of persistent researchers like LeCun and Schmidhuber essentially rebranded the field as deep learning.
Ah, the name change.
Yeah, it helped re-energize things. And then around 2010, 2012 came the next wave of big breakthroughs. Hinton's group in Toronto, Bengio in Montreal.
And what fueled that?
A huge factor was realizing they could use GPUs, graphics processing units.
From video games.
Exactly. NVIDIA GPUs. Their massively parallel architecture, designed for graphics, turned out to be perfect for the matrix math needed to train these really deep networks. Suddenly, training times plummeted.
Okay, so the hardware caught up, or rather, they found the right hardware.
You could say that. And Azoff calls what followed a Cambrian explosion of AI chips. Companies started designing specialized hardware just for AI, moving beyond GPUs.
A whole new industry, basically.
Pretty much. The computational power unlocked by GPUs was a major catalyst for the deep learning revolution we're still in.
Okay, so that sets the stage for AI development. Now, let's pivot to the inspiration. The brain itself, the biology. Azoff starts with the sheer scale, right? Billions of neurons.
Yeah, the numbers are wild. Somewhere around 80 to 100 billion neurons in the human brain.
And the connections.
Each cortical neuron might have like 10,000 synapses, connections with other neurons. It's incredibly dense.
And they're not all the same, are they? Excitatory and inhibitory.
Right, that's Dale's principle Azoff mentions. Most neurons tend to either excite their neighbors, make them more likely to fire, or inhibit them, make them less likely. And interestingly, the excitatory ones seem to use way more energy.
So the brain's energy budget is partly dictated by this balance.
Seems like it. And the current thinking, as Azoff lays out, is that the brain is fundamentally a prediction machine.
A prediction machine. How so?
The idea is it's constantly building internal models of the world based on sensory input and using those models to predict what's going to happen next. It's trying to minimize surprise.
And this happens even without external input.
Apparently so. There's lots of spontaneous activity even during sleep. Some researchers, like DeHaan, talk about a kind of Darwinian selection process for thoughts. The internal models or ideas that are better predictors get strengthened.
Wow. Internal natural selection for thoughts.
It's a compelling idea, and these neurons aren't just simple relays. Azoff notes some hippocampal neurons can fire spontaneously, and communication isn't just chemical synapses.
What else is there?
Electrical synapses, direct electrical connections, often two-way. They actually evolved before chemical synapses. And there's also ephaptic coupling neurons influencing neighbors through their electrical fields without a direct synapse.
So it's a mix of chemical, electrical, and field effects. Way more complex than the simple models.
Much more complex. Azoff also dives into specialized neurons, like the Purkinje cells in the cerebellum.
What's special about them?
They have this incredible, intricate dendritic tree structure, like a dense fan. They fire in complex bursts, and some think these bursts act as predictive signals for coordinating movement.
Okay. And neuromodulation. That sounds different again.
It is. It's where neurotransmitters like dopamine or serotonin are released more broadly, not just at a single synapse, but affecting whole populations of neurons over longer periods. Volume transmission, it's sometimes called.
Like changing the overall mood or state of a brain region.
Kind of, yeah. And dopamine, as Azoff highlights, is crucial for reward and learning. It's not just about pleasure. It actively shapes behavior by reinforcing actions that lead to good outcomes. It's a core learning signal.
Right, okay. Now, memory, this is a big one. How does brain memory compare to computer memory?
Fundamentally different. Computer memory is precise, localized, you retrieve an exact copy. Human memory is distributed, associative, and crucially, reconstructive.
Reconstructive.
Yeah, you don't just replay a memory like a video. You piece it back together each time, potentially with changes or influences from your current state. It's much more dynamic.
Which is why memories can change over time.
Exactly. And while AI networks store info and connection strengths, those can be brittle. New learning can overwrite old stuff, the catastrophic forgetting problem.
Yeah.
Human memory integrates new info more gracefully.
Azoff mentions different types of memory too, right? Short-term, long-term.
Mm-hmm. And the work of Eric Kandel, the Nobel laureate who studied sea slugs.
Sea slugs. Seriously.
Yep. They have relatively simple nervous systems, making them good for studying basic mechanisms. Kandel showed that forming long-term memories involves activating genes in the neuron's nucleus to produce new proteins that strengthen synapses.
So making memories physically changes the neurons at a genetic level.
For long-term storage, yes. Though newer research shows proteins can also be made locally at the synapse. And here's a really weird one Azoff includes: prions.
Wait, like mad cow disease prions.
Kind of, but these are non-harmful versions. Proteins like CPEB that act like prions seem to be essential for maintaining those synaptic changes over the very long term. They help lock in memories.
That is surprising. So memory isn't just forming connections, but actively maintaining them with these special proteins.
Exactly, and it's all about synaptic plasticity, the ability of connections to strengthen or weaken. Plus, epigenetics plays a role. Experiences can change how genes are expressed in neurons.
Okay, incredibly complex. What about brain structure? Lateralization, the left brain, right brain thing?
Yeah, the idea that the two hemispheres specialize. Like, often spatial skills are associated more with the right hemisphere, language with the left, though it's not perfectly clear-cut.
And the cross-wiring. Left brain controls right body, etc.
That's decussation. Azoff mentions a theory that this crossing over might actually help create a better 3D representation of the world from our 2D sensory inputs. It's an interesting idea.
And the two streams for vision. What versus where?
Right, the ventral what and dorsal where or how pathways. It's more about processing streams than strict hemispheric division, but it highlights functional specialization. Azoff even mentions Kim Peek, the megasavant.
Oh, the inspiration for Rain Man.
That's the one. He lacked the corpus callosum, connecting the hemispheres, offering unusual insights into brain function and specialization and potentially intelligence.
Fascinating. And the physical structure, the folds.
Jarification. Those folds massively increase the surface area of the neocortex, the thinking part, fitting more processing power into the skull. It's like crumpling paper.
And the cortex itself has structure.
Jeff Hawkins' theory emphasizes a repeating columnar structure throughout the neocortex. While the degree of uniformity is debated, this modular design seems key. There's even a theory, tension-based morphogenesis, trying to explain how the folds form physically.
Okay. And how does this intricate structure get built? Early development.
It's a dance between nature and nurture. Genes lay the blueprint, but experience shapes everything. Neuron production in the fetus is insane. Azoff quotes rates like 250,000 per minute.
Wow.
These new neurons then migrate, guided by radial glial cells, to their final positions. Then they grow axons and dendrites, guided by chemical signals.
And they make more connections than they need initially.
Yeah, massively more. Then, during adolescence especially, there's large-scale synaptic pruning. Connections that aren't used or are less efficient get eliminated. It's a refinement process.
Like optimizing the network.
Exactly. And the brain's never truly silent, right? Spontaneous activity.
Azoff mentions this is high during sleep and development.
And it seems to play a role in self-organization. Like, spontaneous activity in the visual system before birth helps set up the columns that will later respond to oriented lines.
So the brain wires itself up partly through its own internal noise.
He seems that way. And counterintuitively, the brain often operates sparsely. Only a small fraction of neurons are highly active at any moment. The idea of dark neurons that fire very rarely, silence might be meaningful too.
Okay, that leads inevitably to consciousness.
Yeah.
The big mystery.
Yep. Azoff mentions Dehaene's model. Wakefulness, attention, and conscious access to the information actually making it into our subjective awareness.
And finding the neural correlates, the brain activity linked to experience.
That's the hunt. Some distinguish consciousness, the ongoing subjective feel, from attention, the spotlight selecting information. Edelman and Tononi suggested conscious thought has limited capacity, and our experience might be a series of discrete snapshots stitched together.
Feeling continuous, but actually being step by step at a fine scale.
Right. And consciousness seems to emerge at higher levels of processing, buffered from the raw sensory data overload.
What about animal consciousness?
There's growing acceptance. Azoff notes, citing Enlil Seth and the Cambridge Declaration. It's likely a spectrum, varying in degree and dimension across species. Subjective experience might be linked to certain midbrain structures.
Even insects. Bees.
Jitka's work on bees, showing complex learning and maybe even basic counting, suggests something like awareness. And intriguingly, anesthesia affects plants too, like the Venus flytrap's electrical signaling. It hints at deep, shared biological mechanisms.
Very strange. Okay, shifting focus slightly. Sensory thinking, especially vision.
Azoff argues vision is foundational for human thought and maybe for HLAI. The challenge is building a 3D world from 2D retinal images.
Hoffman's ideas about innate and learned rules.
Exactly. We have built-in assumptions, but we also learn rules subconsciously about how the visual world works, building up from simple features to complex object recognition.
And time and space perception, circadian rhythms.
Huge impact. Our internal 24-hour clocks, run by the SCN suprachiasmatic nuclei in the brain. The Nobel Prize work showed the molecular feedback loop of genes and proteins that drives this clock.
And this mechanism is ancient, found in flies too.
Incredible evolutionary conservation. And we have these clocks not just in the SCN, but in tissues throughout the body, all synchronized.
Amazing. And theories of consciousness itself. Global workspace. IIT.
Azoff briefly touches on them. Barr's global workspace theory, information broadcast for conscious access, higher order thought theories, thinking about thinking, and Tononi's integrated information theory, IIT.
Which has faced criticism.
Yes, Azoff notes IIT has attracted significant scientific pushback recently regarding its claims and testability.
Okay, so that's a whirlwind tour of the brain biology. Now, how do we try to engineer intelligence based on this? AI architectures. Embodied AI comes up first.
Right, neurorobotics, the idea that intelligence, or at least certain kinds of it, develops best through physical interaction with the world. Learning by doing, literally. Different levels of embodiment exist.
And cognitive architectures, like blueprints for general intelligence.
Exactly. Frameworks designed to support learning, reasoning, and knowledge application across different tasks, not just specialized ones. Azoff mentions SOAR, ACTR, RT.
What a state of play there.
A review found quite a few active models, with ACTR being popular, especially for modeling human behavior. But a big challenge for many is reusing knowledge across different kinds of tasks. SPA is mentioned as an exception.
Let's touch on a few. SOAR.
Based on Alan Newell's work, aims for a unified theory of cognition, used in things like large-scale training simulations.
ACTR.
John Anderson's Baby. It's a hybrid, mixing symbolic AI with neural network ideas, really focused on modeling human psychological data and predicting brain activity patterns.
And SPA, semantic pointer architecture.
Chris Eliasmith's approach tries to be more biologically grounded, uses spiking neurons, models neurotransmitters. The core idea is semantic pointers, high-dimensional vectors that represent meaning and can be combined. It shows promise in handling multiple tasks without forgetting.
Okay. And art adaptive resonance theory.
Developed by Carpenter and Grossberg, it's specifically designed to learn new things quickly and stably without catastrophically forgetting old information.
How does it do that?
It uses a vigilance parameter. Basically, how closely must a new input match an existing memory category? If it's not close enough, below the vigilance threshold, a new category is created. ArtMay extends this for supervised tasks.
And there's a biological link proposed.
Yeah, Grossberg suggests the neurotransmitter acetylcholine might relate to controlling this vigilance level in the brain. And importantly, newer art models use more realistic spiking neurons.
Interesting. What about horns? Harmonic oscillator networks.
That sounds different.
It is.
Yeah.
Effenberger's research showed that building networks where units oscillate, and including signal transmission delays like axons has, can really boost performance.
Boost how? They were more parameter efficient, learned faster, performed better on benchmarks like MNIST image recognition, and were more robust to noise compared to standard recurrent networks. Adding heterogeneity variations in frequency and delay, like in the brain, helped even more.
So embracing the messiness of biology helps.
It suggests that maybe parallel analog computation with oscillators is a very efficient approach, even if individual units are slow, like neurons.
Okay, then there's Numenta and HTM, Hawkins' thousand brains theory.
Right, hierarchical temporal memory. It's a model inspired by the neocortex with columns and layers. The core idea of thousand brains is that every cortical column learns complete models of objects through movement and sensory input, rather than one big model.
How does it learn?
It uses local, unsupervised Hebbian learning, neurons that fire together, wire together, and focuses on learning sequences. Numenta's shown that making the connections and activities sparse, like in the brain, dramatically improves efficiency.
Makes sense. And of course, we have to talk about deep learning neural networks, DLNNs.
The current dominant paradigm, for sure. Azoff touches on the origins of generative AI GANs, OpenAI's beginnings.
And the transformer architecture.
Absolutely seminal. Revolutionized natural language processing and led directly to large language models, LLMs.
Like GPT-3, GPT-4.
Exactly. Azoff mentions training techniques like mixture of experts, fine-tuning to keep them updated, retrieval augmentation to access external knowledge.
And those surprising emergent abilities.
Yeah, that's a big topic. As these models get huge, they suddenly develop skills they weren't explicitly trained for: reasoning, arithmetic, coding. It's not fully understood why.
Scaling just unlocks it somehow.
Seems like it. Also things like few-shot learning a new task from just a handful of examples, often using vector embeddings to represent concepts numerically.
But these DLNNs are often criticized for not being very brain-like, right? What about more biologically plausible models?
That's a key theme in Azoff's book. Can we make deep learning more like the brain? One area is backpropagation itself.
But wasn't that seen as biologically implausible?
Initially, yes. The standard algorithm seems to need information to flow backwards in ways synapses don't allow. But researchers like Hinton and others have explored ways the brain might approximate it,
Oh.
using top-down feedback signals to guide local learning rules, or even showing that learning can happen with random, fixed feedback connections, which is weird but works in simulations. There are still challenges, like synapses being mostly one-way. Other algorithms, like greedy infomechs, are also being explored.
What about reinforcement learning? Learning from rewards?
Widely used, often combined with deep learning, deep RL. But again, the reliance on standard backpropagation raises biological questions, and deep RL often struggles with assigning credit correctly and can take a very long time to train.
And neural Darwinism. Edelman's idea.
The idea that selection processes, like evolution, operate within the brain on populations of neurons or circuits. It's a different perspective, less about precise algorithms, more about dynamic competition and selection shaping cognition. Some models try to implement this.
Are there other biologically inspired computational ideas?
Azoff mentions neural annealing for avoiding catastrophic forgetting and validation of Friston's free energy principle in actual cortical cultures, the idea the brain tries to minimize prediction error.
And causality. Moving beyond correlation.
Crucial. Pearl and McKenzie argue current AI is mostly stuck at association. We need AI that understands cause and effect, can reason about interventions, what if I do this, and counterfactuals, what if I had done that differently. There are libraries emerging for this.
Right. And spike-based computing. Using timing.
Instead of just activation levels, information is in the precise timing of neuron spikes. Simon Thorpe has championed this, suggesting it's very efficient. Neurons as analog to delay converters. There are simulators like SpikeNet and hardware like BrainChip's Akita exploring this.
So faster, more energy efficient potentially.
That's the hope. Plus, it captures temporal dynamics naturally. Learning algorithms for continuous spike streams are being developed too.
One more. Hyperdimensional computing, HDC.
Using extremely high-dimensional vectors, thousands or tens of thousands of dimensions, to represent everything.
Wow.
These hypervectors have useful mathematical properties. You can combine them easily, they're robust to noise, and they can represent complex relationships. It's inspired partly by how distributed information might be in the brain, shown promise on reasoning tasks too.
Okay, a lot of different approaches. What about the hardware to run all this? Neuromorphic chips.
Yeah, hardware designed to mimic brain architecture, event-driven, low power, using spikes. Intel's low-E chips are a big example, used for robotics, sensory processing. RAIN Neuromorphics uses analog computation.
Not just digital simulation.
Right. And then you have NVIDIA's GPUs, which, while not neuromorphic, have been absolutely essential for training the current big deep learning models.
So different hardware for different AI philosophies almost.
You could say that. And then Azoff mentions the dish brain experiment.
Neurons in a dish playing Pong.
That's the one. Actual living neurons learning to control the Pong paddle based on feedback. It shows biological neural networks can learn and interact with an environment, even in vitro. They're even using it to test theories like the free energy principle.
Mind-bending stuff. Okay, all this leads to the big question. Can we actually create AGIL AI, human-level AI?
Azoff frames it as three possible routes. HL2 AI, heavily neuroscience-inspired, EngHL AI, purely engineered, maybe ignoring biology, and hybrids blending both.
But how do we even know if we understand intelligence well enough to build it? He mentions an experiment with a microprocessor.
Right, Jonas and Cording. They applied standard neuroscience analysis tools to the activity patterns of a known microprocessor running simple games. They couldn't figure out how it worked. It shows just having the data isn't enough. You need the right conceptual models, the cognitive theories, like watching lights in an office building doesn't tell you the company's business plan.
So, Azoff's take is?
He thinks an algorithmic simulation could be intelligent, possibly requiring something he calls internal thought flow consciousness, ITFC, which might emerge from advanced visual processing. He gets into the philosophy is simulation enough? What is alive?
And he sees levels of intelligence.
Yeah, a progression from simpler systems up towards and maybe beyond human levels. He argues visual thinking might be a better foundation than language as it evolved earlier.
He connects thinking and motor control too.
Cites Eagleman observing similarities in neural firing patterns for thought and movement. He also pushes back against extreme skepticism about HLAI, arguing for the power of the scientific method and pointing to the spectrum of animal consciousness. Understanding the neural code is key.
What about lateralization again? The two hemispheres.
He speculates the cross-wiring helps 3D vision and maybe the internal dialogue between hemispheres aids decision-making, something potentially useful for AI design.
And memory for HLAI. Do we need artificial prions?
Probably not replicate it molecularly. Engineered solutions, maybe using HTC, could work if they capture the key dynamics plasticity, short long-term management.
But current artificial neurons are way simpler than real ones.
Massively. Azoff calls real neurons packaged algorithms because of all their internal complexity, nucleus, proteins, etc. Today's artificial neurons are just simple mathematical functions by comparison.
Neuromodulation like dopamine needs to be an AI too.
Azoff thinks so, citing work by Doya Krichmar on implementing reward and motivation systems. He even sketches a hybrid HLAI, H2LAI, concept model.
What's in his model?
Things like left-right brain modules, an internal feedback loop like PDCA cycle, LLMs, HTC, core directives, a reward mechanism, distributed decision-making, and a strong focus on visual processing first.
How would we even test for HLAI if we built something like that?
Good question. Azoff suggests benchmarks like learning fast from few examples, few-shot learning, common sense reasoning, multimodal skills with autonomous switching, strong prediction abilities, accumulating knowledge into wisdom creativity, integrating with standard computing.
What about current LLMs? Are they intelligent? Close to HLAI.
That's the debate right now. Azoff notes their emergent abilities are impressive. Cites Hinton's recent claims that they might actually understand things. Mentions the paper calling GPT-4 early AGI.
Yep.
But he also contrasts their passive reactive nature with the brain's constant active internal world generation, citing Dehaene. They might lack that inner simulation.
So what are the absolute key ingredients needed for AGHLAI, according to Azoff?
He lists several: visual cognition, touch-based cognition, emotional richness, evaluative systems, a unified self-environment model, sense of time, integrating other senses, and ultimately self-awareness, plus distributed decision-making and embodiment. It's a tall order.
Wow. Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive, that was a lot. We've journeyed right through the intersection of brains and AI in the hunt for HLAI.
A huge amount of ground, yeah. From the earliest logical neurons to neurons playing Pong and complex cognitive architectures.
And definitely some surprising facts surfaced. That ancient clock biology shared across species.
The different energy costs of neuron type.
The brain buzzing away even during sleep.
And those emergent reasoning skills in LLMs, even if we don't fully get why.
For me, some aha moments were that potential link between brain wiring and 3D vision.
Yeah, that was cool. And the prions in long-term memory. Who knew?
Right. And the whole idea of the brain, or even individual neurons running internal simulations or predictions.
It really shifts your perspective on what computation might mean in a biological system.
Absolutely. So if any of this sparked interest, Azoff's book provides a ton of references to go deeper on, specific topics like the predictive brain or neuromorphic computing.
Definitely worth exploring if something caught your attention.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave everyone with. Considering how fast both neuroscience and AI are moving,
Yeah.
what does it really mean for something biological or artificial to understand or be truly intelligent? And, well, how close are we actually to capturing the essence of human-level thought in machines?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Something to chew on.